Hi, and welcome to our discussion of thunderstorms. We're talking about different types of thunderstorms right now. We've gone through different classification schemes. Specifically, we talked about severity and shear, and now we're looking at cell configuration. And our first type of thunderstorm we're going to look at is the single cell type thunderstorm. So the single cell thunderstorm has been around for a while. I guess at least the way we know it. And for years we used to call it the air mass thunderstorm. It's a thunderstorm that typically develops in benign weather conditions. It's just one cell all by itself, usually a small cell, not very big, and develops in an atmosphere that does not have much wind shear. So it's a non-shear type thunderstorm. And as a result, the updraft and downdraft kind of compete against each other. And of course, the stronger the updraft, the bigger the storm and the more severe it is. So if there is not a strong updraft, then the thunderstorm typically is not very severe. So these thunderstorms typically form on nice sunny days. Usually they form in the afternoon and then the early evening, usually caused by sea breezes or surface heating or weak surface convergence. Usually they're kind of hard to forecast because it's really small scale features that set these guys off. And as I mentioned, the updraft forms or the downdraft forms right within the updraft, and as a result it competes with the updraft. It kills the updraft basically. When the downdraft exits the cloud, it hits the ground and spreads out, causing a gust front, and that gust front will cut off the moisture flow that's going into the storm. So as a result, these thunderstorms don't last very long. This is a slide from the it was once upon a time the older version of the Storm Spotter's Guide. This is called the Advanced Storm Spotter's Guide, and it shows the descending course. Shows what this is two different figures. The top figure shows ordinary thunderstorms. Ordinary thunderstorms are air mass type thunderstorms. That's another term that they use for them. Single cell air mass or ordinary thunderstorms are all the same. And you can see that the thunderstorm develops in about 10 minutes. It reaches 10 to 15 minutes. It reaches its mature stage, and then it starts dissipating afterwards. And you can see it grow, with time until finally, after about 20 minutes, it falls apart. At the bottom part of this diagram, it shows a pulse severe thunderstorm. And what that is, it's an air mass thunderstorm with a stronger updraft. And if it has a stronger updraft, it's able to hold the precipitation up for a longer period of time, hold the hail up basically. You know that the terminal velocity of hail is greater as it gets larger and larger. So if you have a stronger updraft, the hailstone won't be able to fall through towards the ground. It'll be supported by the updraft. So that's what a pulse severe thunderstorm is. It's a severe thunderstorm with a very strong updraft, a single cell air mass type thunderstorm with a stronger updraft, but still the downdraft forms within the updraft, and as a result, all of the suspended precipitation descends very rapidly towards the ground. So you could get large hail, and you could also get stronger winds from this type of storm. Typically, you don't get tornadoes. You really don't see tornadoes with this type of storm. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to fly right seat on our research jet, our Cessna Citation. I was the SIC, had an SIC checkout. And while we were holding over the Kennedy Space Center, I took a camera and took some pictures of a single cell thunderstorm going up. So you can see, the top two pictures shows it developing. The third picture, which is the lower left, you can see it start to anvil out. And then you can see the anvil spreading out, and we're actually a little bit closer in this picture. So we were flying anvil studies at that time. So some of the features with a single cell thunderstorm, as I mentioned, it's one big cell that goes up. Not big, but one cell that goes up. The anvil spreads out in all directions usually because the wind at altitude is very light. You'll see a descending radar core, and it's hard to see on airborne weather radar. If you get radar data from ground-based weather radars like the WSR-88D, you can actually construct that and look at a period of time as the core, the radar core in the center of the storm, the precipitation falls. And actually the next few slides, that's what we're going to do. These storms may be isolated, but usually they're not. Once the downdraft hits the ground, it sets off other thunderstorms. It acts as a trigger for other thunderstorms. Very, very similar to popcorn, kind of like popcorn going up. So these storms are typically difficult to forecast, but they happen every day. Places like Florida, and also coastal areas and even mountainous areas, you'll see single cell type thunderstorms. Speaking of Florida, here's a little research I did. Looking at a storm over Florida. This is from the Melbourne radar, Melbourne, Florida. Looking at, let's see, this is a CAPI. CAPI is a constant altitude PPI. So PPI is basically what you typically expect when you look at a radar scope. You see radar returns in different colors. Normally radar goes out at a certain elevation angle. This was constructed so that it's a constant altitude. And specifically I built this for 12,500 feet, which is very close to the freezing level. And we're going to look at the storm up in the upper left. I circled it in red, and we are going to do a cross section across that storm right down the middle from A to B. So with that in mind, I thought it'd be nice to look at the sounding. This is the sounding for that day, the Tampa Bay area, and that's the closest sounding. Freezing level on this particular day was 11,600 feet. That's important because typically you get strong radar returns right at the freezing level and above. Remember that ice coated with water tends to reflect the most radar energy. And then remember we talked about how thunderstorms grow up to the tropopause. Here, down in Florida, the tropopause is very high, close to 48,000 feet. So here's the beginning of the thunderstorm. You can see this is along the bottom axis, that's the distance, and along the vertical axis, that's actually the height. And you can see the colors. And of course, blue and green are weaker radar returns. Yellow and red are stronger radar returns. So you can see that in this case, the radar or the thunderstorm is starting to echo right around the freezing level, about 12,000 feet, maybe just a little bit lower, but that's where you start to see the radar returns. And you can see the radar returns get stronger with time. Specifically, you can see it go to red. It's turning into red. Notice that the core is starting to stretch a little bit. You're starting to see yellow down towards the ground and also yellow starting to go up. In this case, the thunderstorm is just starting to go up through about 28,000 feet. So you can see that it's growing, but it's still not up to the tropopause, which we said was about 48,000 feet. Here's another picture. You can see that the yellow has reached the ground, so you're starting to get precipitation at the ground. The storm is going up to about 35,000 feet. And once again, you can see the strongest radar returns are about 14,000 feet and below. Remember that the freezing level was somewhere around 12,000 feet. Here you see the red is reaching the ground. The storm is going up through 42,000 feet. That's the tops of the storms. But you can see that the red is starting to descend and reach the ground. That means that there's heavy precipitation reaching the ground. And at the next time, you can see that the red actually is descending. It's actually going down closer to the ground. You're starting to see the yellow go up a little bit higher. But you can see that there is a very well-defined core, red core, that had descended and is impacting the ground. So they're getting probably rain, perhaps maybe even some very small hail at the surface. Storm tops at this time, before they were up at 42, and it looks like there's a hint that they may still be up there. But here you don't see the storm up very high anymore. It's starting to kind of kind of dissipate a little bit perhaps. You can see the strong rate of return near the ground, the red. And that's what you see in this. So what we saw was the red started out right about at the freezing level and then descended. So that's your descending core. And you can see the storm grow and eventually got up to about 42,000 feet. Remember that the tropopause was about 48,000 feet. So this storm never made it up to the tropopause. And if I was flying and knew the height of the tropopause, I'd realize that these storms are storms that I should avoid. You should always avoid a thunderstorm, but it's probably not one that is extremely dangerous with large hail and tornadoes and strong winds and things like that. Since it didn't reach up to the tropopause, it means that there wasn't a lot of instability with the storm. I hope you enjoyed looking at single cell thunderstorms and looking at the cross section and watching the core descend. In the next video, we'll talk about multi-cell clusters.